Nobody puts baby in the corner. Okay, it's that line that everyone remembers from Dirty Dancing, and what the heck is that all about? What's so bad about sitting in the corner? I mean, I kind of like it. I mean, it looked like it was a pretty good view of the stage from the corner, so I don't know what baby's complaining about. Personally, I like sitting in the corner when I go out. You're totally not in the way of the wait staff, and it can be kind of cozy also. So what's Johnny's problem with her sitting in the fucking corner? Settle down, boy. Settle down. But I guess we finally got me to read a funny opening from that movie. I really needed to get that one out. Feel much better.
Would you like to learn from those that are taking their lives, their businesses, and their passions to the next level? Best-selling author of Speakeasy and master connector Lou Diamond is here to connect you to some of the most inspiring and amazing people on this planet. Get ready to thrive loud with Lou Diamond.
Inch by inch, row by row, I'm gonna make this garden grow.
Welcome, everyone, to another spectacular, fantabulous, absolutely stupendous episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting you to the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. I'm your host, Lou Diamond, and today on Thrive Loud, we have a B2B tech marketing leader, author, startup mentor, and ecosystem builder with more than a decade of experience scaling SaaS companies through customer-centric marketing. She is currently the VP of Marketing at Sastrify. Her latest book, Lead Upwards, How Startup Joiners Can Impact New Ventures, Build Amazing Careers, and Inspire Great Teams, gives insights into how to prepare for, earn, and succeed in an executive role at a startup company, which is not an easy task to do. Thrive Loud listeners, I am very excited because we're going to have a fun conversation about one of the most complex places to work in the industry that we live in, and that is, I've got Sarah E. Brown here today. Sarah, how are you today?
Lou, I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to talk to you.
This is truly an honor to have you. We're going to give the shout out right at the top of the show, our very good friend, Jeanette Brunet, who is a fellow author on your publisher and label, and she speaks only the highest of you. We had her on very recently as her book just came out, and your book came out earlier this year, which is amazing. I want to give our leaders, you know what? Our listeners are leaders, so we are giving them what they need. I want to give our listeners a chance to catch up, Sarah. Can we do a little rewind? I want to understand how this specific niche of what you do became your gig.
Sure. And a huge shout out, just highly recommend Self-Care Mindset if you haven't checked it out yet. It's worth a read. I got my start in the startup world by accident. I wanted to go into journalism and ended up finding my way into one startup company. And it turns out that is the gateway to never leaving. And in my career as a startup marketer, growing through the ranks, I started to notice a dearth of information and resources out there for startup employees. And it's amazing. We have so much proverbial ink spilled for founders, right? These lionized folks who deserve that, pedestal that we put them on in many ways, who start these companies, get all of these resources, but the joiners, these folks who are becoming parts of startups but don't necessarily found them, we're the majority, right? We make up the majority of these companies. We're the ones doing the heavy lifting in many cases all across the industry. And so when I wrote my first book, Power to the Startup People, it was focused on empowering employees. But my newest book, Lead Upwards, and what got me here today talking to you, and why I'm so excited to share this with everyone listening, is I felt that there was a gap between this sort of middle management at a startup, right? You've worked your way up, you've built some sort of a career, but how do you get to the highest levels of startup leadership? How do you become an executive? And how do you have a real seat at the leadership table, at the board level? How do you get in the rooms where big decisions are being made? And most importantly, how are you going to do this effectively? And it turns out there was nothing out there. People get executive coaches. I myself benefited from an executive coach. I couldn't have made the leap without it. to me, that felt unfair. Why should someone need coaching, which is often a huge investment, in order to even know that they're qualified? So we put together this book with Wiley to help people understand, what does it take to be an effective startup leader? How do I know if I'm right for startup leadership or even would want to do it? And once I'm doing it, how do I be effective, particularly as a member of an underrepresented group, people who may or may not have seen themselves in this role?
Okay. I got a ton of questions because I think there's something really interesting about the startup space. And I want to actually start off with a very vanilla, basic question to you. And that is, what do we define as a startup today? Because a lot of companies kind of, our startups, they're literally from the old, we'll go to Apple started in the garage, if Steve Jobs' garage or whatever it might be. And we knew that as a startup. And there are startups popping and incubating companies all over the place. And then they kind of get some funding and they get going. And then they're getting a little bit more mature and they start winning clients and growing and hopefully staying in business and getting to that next level. But yet they like to hold on to that onus of that ownership that we are a startup. In your experience, from having worked in many of them, can you share what you define as a startup?
I love that you're bringing this up, and the answer is yes, all of those, which is a terrifying answer, right? And if you think about it, a lot of people will join companies at this garage stage, right? Plugging in your MacBook, possibly the blender goes out because it's such a low tech setup in this proverbial garage, and then the company grows. And then the company grows bigger. And then suddenly you don't know everyone's name. You're sitting around the lunch table and now there's, enough people all around the company where you can't do that anymore. And as the company grows and sort of the virtual lunch table, if we're working in a remote or hybrid setup, as the company grows, the expectations for startup joiners increase and they become more rigorous. And we often see where folks are very effective at generalist roles, maybe 10 people, 20 people at a startup. Once you get to that sort of Series A or later, the company is then expected to operate efficiently, effectively, and leaders who are joining need to scale up their skills with the company. And unfortunately, a lot of leaders get hired over because they can't make that skills gap leap fast enough. There's a time horizon, right, where you need the skills yesterday at a startup. But really, let's say you're now at this stage of maturity where in the market, there's expectations, right? So I hoped that my book would be a kind of cheat sheet if you want to do the work to get to that next stage of maturity. But here's something, Lou, that I think is really important, which is self-awareness and self-reflection. And sometimes that early stage is what gets us up in the morning. It gets us excited. And we don't want to work at a 500-person scale up. Once there's all that process in place and everyone is niched and specialized, that's not exciting to us. So there's also a lot of exercises in the book to think through, am I happy at that stage? Do I want to do that? Do I want to scale up? You don't have to. You can absolutely keep joining those early stage companies. I think it's important to be aware of what's best for you in your career.
I myself was in a startup a very long time ago. Too long to share on this show, but let's just say it was the late 90s. And I watched the company grow from what was about 400 people to about close to 2,500 to 3,000 people in what was only about 18 months, maybe within that. It was hockey stick growth on not only staffing, but clients and revenue and all that stuff. And also got an opportunity to watch it go in the other direction as well, which was good and bad. I state this, though, that what I do remember was that in that smaller stage, people are asked and tasked with having to take on more responsibility as they grow because they were the earlier ones. And many people might not actually have the outside experience in helping to lead others in certain ways, leadership roles or more responsibilities or help to manage others, but have to because of the needs of what is going on at the organization at that time, and that they were one of the first people there and they want to reward these people that have been there. Let's talk about this. Sometimes at startups, we move up the people who aren't quite ready to be there yet. So to somebody who helps understand what those leaders are, first of all, do you agree with that statement? And second of all, how do you manage this from a leadership point of view within startups? Because I would say out of all the things that I got to witness, which is an incredible way to learn, it's literally learn by trial and fire. But is it the best way or the most efficient way for the startup to succeed?
It's a lot to unpack there. I will say what you're getting at is folks who are maybe first-time managers suddenly becoming heads of departments or at least managing multiple folks and lacking all the training. And I think there's another piece to what you're talking about too, which is the idea of advancement only coming through becoming a manager. And we talk about this in the book, the importance of having an IC track and a management track, and a good startup creating career pathing as it matures will do that. But unfortunately, early stage companies often are figuring out sort of which end is up in the market and internally, right? They're figuring out all their processes and systems. So it's up to you as an individual joining to figure out, am I okay joining a company where management is promoted with no experience and I might be subject to whatever whims of the untrained manager are, which we've all been there. We've all had managers and bosses. We interviewed people in the book who talked about what good leadership looked like. And in that retelling of those stories, we can all feel and have, unfortunately, our own personal anecdotes when that wasn't the case. So I will say, if you're joining a company and you notice that people are being promoted, not necessarily being given the support and training, that might be a deal breaker for you. And as a leader, when we become a first-time manager or leader, it's very important that we do invest in our leadership because it impacts people's lives. And you mentioned sort of trial by fire and sort of learning as you were going. With that learning, I imagine, I'm just going to take a gander here, there was potentially a lot of stress and a lot of challenge that maybe was outside of the work itself. Is that correct, or am I leading here?
No, you're 100% right. And I mean, I myself had to experience it. Others I got to witness do it as well. I wouldn't become the leader that I am today if I didn't have that experience. So there was incredible, valuable things. But I'm not just talking about myself. I've seen it in helping other companies over the last 2 to 3 years and seeing what's going on, that you are hitting the fast forward button in some of these instances because the speed of growth in that startup, and a successful one, is working. And there is this undue pressure to make sure, one, you're keeping the people that are there, and there's a familiarity with those that started out as it was growing small. So the challenge is not only managing yourself as an individual in that organization, but as leaders in those organizations, managing to make sure you have the best people doing the best stuff, because what you hired initially when you did a startup is a lot different than what it is when it starts to grow to that next level of growth. This is where you agree with this, I believe.
I agree. And one other point is, I think we talk about this in the book, scaling is really hard in both directions. So we're talking about folks who are learning on the job, right, or becoming sort of thrown into management roles, and we can unpack that. But we also see the opposite trend, which is seasoned adults. I don't love this term, but sort of folks who have been in the industry long enough or coming from larger companies. They've proven they can do it, being brought into a startup and unable to get on the shop floor, unable to see what's really happening. And we've all worked for leaders who are out of touch and have no sense of what's really going on. At a startup, regardless of the stage, there's this really challenging but hypercritical skill, which is called zoomability, which is going in and out of these depths, right? You need to be able to communicate at a highly detailed level what's going on with your teams and your reports. You're going to be in the weeds potentially. If you're a CMO, you're going to be reviewing customer videos and editing alongside the team. You're going to be going over press releases and channel reporting and ads and all of that, right? Really, really in the weeds. But you're also needing to zoom out to the board level and talk about the business outcomes that you're driving. And regardless of your function, you're going to need to work closely with your peers and talk about your business outcomes as they relate to their business outcomes together, moving the business forward. These are really different skill sets. And unfortunately, whether you're coming up or you're scaling down, it's hard. And so we need a playbook. We have to talk about it. But one thing I'll note is I don't think it's impossible to do it in either direction. And both directions bring a certain set of advantages. If you're coming from that background, a friend of mine, Erin Rand, who's quoted in the book, they said they had to knock the corporate off her when she came into the startup world. If you can imagine, there were a lot of different boundaries. She had a different orientation of how companies and people operated. She had to work through that, but she also brought a level of rigor and experience that was invaluable as she made that transition. And at the same time, there are managers who have deep rich historical knowledge of a company. They bring the mission, the passion, they understand the target market because they've potentially been that first salesperson doing those calls, right? Working alongside the founders. And so if we're able to then train up those folks and help those folks succeed, they bring a wealth of richness of experience. So there's advantages and disadvantages to coming in both directions. The key is to be able to move forward and sort of down into the weeds while maintaining some form of sanity.
I love zoom ability, by the way. Excellent way of looking at it. The ability to have that blimp, super duper camera lens looking up and down an organization. And to this point, we just got out of we'll call it the 2021 year. We're recording this in late 2022. And that is that the whole Great Resignation was finding people who worked for usually larger organizations were trying to figure out what they wanted to do. They wanted to become solopreneurs. They may have wanted to try new things. And a lot of that has led to people going to startups or smaller size companies. Let's talk about this. This is a different makeup. Those who have been in many startups like yourself, or have an understanding of what the startup culture is like, versus those who have come from traditional corporate businesses. And you highlighted this in your last comment, that there are benefits from the experience of both or more structure of another. Talk about, as a leader, how do you bring those two together? Because there are benefits in that. And there's a lot of negatives and draws from each one of them, but how do we pull out all the positives together and not only keep the underlying culture of the organization, but connect it together so that you can get the best of both worlds when a great organization is working together?
Mm-hmm. I love this question because you're talking about the Great Resignation. And I would say there's a lot of situations in startups where this naturally happens all the time at certain inflection points of growth. People with different stages of maturity and specialization entering a company. For example, I've been through 6 exits now, some of them more exciting than others, but a couple where I've joined the acquiring company. So going from a really small startup or I would say medium-sized startup, as I would define it, and then potentially even I joined a public company during one of the acquisitions. And so you're creating these Franken teams of people with different backgrounds. And sometimes it's a monster, but I do think what's tended to work well, and I talk a little bit about how to navigate acquisitions, is thinking about what your unique strengths are. I always bring it back to what are you good at and what do you want to do? You're not going to be good at everything, and finding some way to get agency in whatever the changes are. And something that you brought up is this current economic climate, current volatility. We're seeing a lot of that in the startup industry that's having a pretty negative effect on tech workers' ability to kind of think through their careers. I think the key opportunities that we need to think through as we're leading through these times of adversity where there's more pressure than ever to perform, but also potentially companies are needing to make cuts or layoffs or shifts. You might need to do that as a leader on your team. These are all really challenging things that we need to acknowledge. I think figuring out where you can control and provide value. For instance, if your headcount gets reduced, you can't hire as many people in the next year or next 6 months because there's been a hiring freeze. How can you better support the team you have? What investments can you make that may or may not even cost a high dollar amount, but are about the emotional investment in your team's well-being and wellness? And I think there's a lot to learn around where the industry is going. We're still seeing all those shifts play out. But I think what keeps me sane or sane enough during this time is thinking, what can I control? How can I make an impact in my immediate sphere? And as that continues to shift with people of different abilities, again, thinking through how to best support my team of individuals. And that topic of attunement, which we talk about in the book, is really important to me because founders, it's amazing, have a lot of attunement in companies. This is something that really shocked me when I got into the startup world. If you've ever been to a startup party, Lou, for a different company you've been a part of, maybe they had...
I have.
Okay,
at least
maybe
I remember most of them, not all of them, but I remember most of them. Yes.
Okay, you remember most of them. I was shocked. One startup I went to always had IPAs at parties. And I thought, well, what is this? This is written in some company lore. The founder liked them, right? We always need IPAs at parties. I worked at a different startup and the founder didn't drink alcohol. We never had alcohol at company events. And I share these two, regardless of where you are in the drinking spectrum, the fact that these things seem like natural law at a startup, it seems the way things are. Every startup is different. It's quirky in its own ways. And a lot of things get baked into the DNA because it was part of the early team's preference. So I will say, if you're in a startup and you're not loving it, it's worth trying something else until you find your right fit, and not to personalize. Hey, if you're not an IPA drinker, it doesn't mean you don't belong in the startup world.
I like that. I don't know how I think about IPAs, actually. I'm a little indifferent, but I totally get it. I want to ask this question because this is what I was trying to deal with. You've been in many of these different situations, obviously in different companies, and you're also having different types of roles, heads of marketing. You're helping to synthesize these ideas. You're writing books about it. You're helping to execute some of these things. You wear lots of different hats. Which hat, Sarah Brown, do you like putting on most each morning? And or which role of what you do in this world is the one that gets you the most excited?
That's such a lovely question. I love that, and I'm appreciating. I work currently for a European startup, and we're going to market in the U.S. And I tend to wear hats that match sort of the European team. It's very nice to kind of all dress alike. It's a startup.
Is it a beret?
It's not. It's like I'll give Adidas a shout out, or Adidas. Okay. I don't know how you say it, but
I think it's Adidas.
Like a cat. Okay, there you go. Which hat do I love? So there's a hat that I wear regardless of what I'm trying to do, which is I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. I'm a woman and I'm a startup executive. All of these things are identities that I just walk through the world with. And I have found that in my work as a Techstars mentor, as an author, as a leader on a startup team, that just being myself and wearing that hat helps show other people that they can potentially do that too. And I had such a lack of role models of people who looked anything like me, and was very fortunate to have role models who didn't look like me and were from groups that I didn't identify with, but who were willing to invest in me and saw things in me. But now that I'm in a group called Chief and starting to meet more women leaders, I'm starting to hear more and more just the impact that we can have on the next generation. So I love giving back to community. If I had to pick, it would probably be something around the mentorship and giving back and that piece, which I fortunately get to do in all of the roles I mentioned. But just being myself as a startup person, I've worked really hard to get to own all of that. And I hope other people get to own whatever individual wacky thing you want to do out here in the startup world. And this is a through line of my book. And I have to say it, Lou, if you'll let me, because I'm so passionate about it. If you want to be in the startup world and you're a joiner, you deserve to be here. And no one gets to decide when your journey is done. No one gets to decide if you've failed. No one gets to decide that you don't deserve to be here. And so there's all these obstacles, all of these challenges. But if you want to do this, I believe this really is a space that has room for everyone who wants to be there. So keep going. I will be rooting for you.
I love that. Love that. Sarah, I love asking guests on the program this question. I want to see where this goes. Let's talk about this. You went through multiple exits. You're a successful author, two-time author. You are head of marketing at Sastrify. You are a leader in this space and a representative of an incredible community, and loving and living your passion each and every day, which is why you're here on Thrive Loud, which makes you thrive on most days. But we all have those days where we're a little off our game and we're not quite kicking on all cylinders. Sarah E. Brown, when you have trouble thriving, what practice do you seek, or maybe which individual do you seek out to get yourself back on the thriving track?
Oh, I love that. I love that. I will say there was a long period of writing this book where I was not thriving. And writing the book helped me get back on the thriving track. And so the answer to your question is community, and reminding myself that I'm a part of something so much bigger than myself. And all of my individual challenges feel small in comparison to what we're all going through together. During the pandemic, we were all isolated. We're all going through challenges, some of us different challenges that were harder than others. And writing this book, I interviewed almost 50 people, CEOs, VPs, directors, board members, VCs, folks who are deep in the startup world, and asked them, what is it that makes a good startup leader? And from those conversations, I felt joy and I felt connection, and being able to then put that in a book and share it with all of you and be able to hopefully inspire the next generation of startup leaders. That was what brought me connection. It brought me joy and frankly kept me going. And so whenever I feel that I'm having a hard time or I'm getting lost in my own world, reminding myself of others and the ability to connect and be grateful and to share and to think about how to make the ecosystem better, that always puts me right on track.
Oh, I like that. I want to do the admin part of the show with a little bit of an extra tweak on this. Sarah, do me a favor, share with the listeners all the places people can find you, learn about you, get the book. And in addition, at the very end of it, talk about Sastrify on exactly what Sastrify does and go with that. So I'll give you the floor. It always gets more execution when they hear it from you.
I love that. Thank you. So my website, sarahbrownmarketing.com, is a great place to start. My book, Lead Upwards, How Startup Joiners Can Impact New Ventures, Build Amazing Careers, and Inspire Great Teams, is available all the usual places books are sold, the Wiley website, as well as Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, etc. And in terms of Sastrify, we are a B2B SaaS company focused on helping software procurement. And so we enable software companies to buy software better, to save more on their software, but most importantly, to manage and optimize all the different tools you buy in one place. And if you've ever, as a consumer, looked at, mint.com or some form where you can see all of your different tools and apps, it's sort of wild how many subscriptions we have. Now, take that on the corporate level, it gets pretty gnarly. And so we help companies get all of that automated, get on track of it. And like I said, we're ROI positive. So most importantly, save money and hopefully build more efficient companies so you can hire more great leaders and do great things.
Love it. We're going to go down Fun Street here, Sarah. And actually, before I leave that, so Sastrify is only 1A, not 2As, huh? It wasn't SAS.
It's amazing working in the startup world, just the amazing different ways vowels can be employed or not employed in a startup title. We could have a whole podcast about that. But yes, Sastrify with 1A, and come check us out. We'd love to chat.
We will. We'll put it on the show notes. Everyone will get a chance to do that. I just wanted to make sure we put it there so people know exactly how to connect everyone here. All right. So we're going to go down Fun Street here, and this is how this rolls. I'm going to start off, first of all, by asking you what you already shared with me. Can you share with the listeners what's one of your all-time favorite movies?
I put Carol, and the reason why is it's one of the few LGBTQ films with a happy ending. So I'm a sucker for a good holiday film and a good happy ending. So I put Carol.
Okay. Are there other like streaming shows, or what do you like watching right now? Are you like into that type of stuff? Is there like streaming shows or any content?
I don't stream a lot, but The White Lotus, and I'm on the new season. It's quite the thriller. Really enjoy that. So curious to see where it's going this season.
They do like this dark comedy thing, and I saw the first season, and now I'm watching the second one, Sarah, and I can't quite get my hands around if I like it or not, but it's certainly keeping me on edge. They're engaging us all. It's also nice to see Michael Imperioli on television again as a big Sopranos fan, so I like
There you go.
We're going to do the speed round here, Sarah. Here's how this rolls. I'm going to ask you a question. I want the first thing that comes to your mind. These are things that lift you up, motivate you, make you feel good. Basically, they make you thrive. Ready? Okay. Of late, a song that you've been listening to, or maybe one that pumps you up.
Peter, Paul, and Mary, the song about the garden growing.
Wow.
I don't know if you hang out with any young kids, but it's magical.
Okay,
Garden.
that's spectacular. Well, my parents were huge Peter, Paul, and Mary, and they had all the LPs growing up, so that's amazing. This is a first. We actually bring back Peter, Paul, and Mary into the show. I like that.
Perfect.
A favorite food that is not a dessert.
I'm getting back into spirulina. I'm a longtime vegan, and I can't help but put it on my salads.
Okay. Favorite dessert?
Anything dark chocolate.
An activity you wish you did more of?
Sailing. We're kind of out of the season right now, but I love getting on a sailboat.
You can go further south and go sailing. It's just up here. It's out of the season.
There you go. Thank you.
An activity you wish you did less of?
Say endless Zoom meetings.
Yeah, I hear you there. If I could snap my finger, Sarah E. Brown, and you could be anywhere in the world, where are you?
I'd be right where I am in Oakland, California today. Really happy to be here.
Love it. Sarah E. Brown, before I leave here, I want you to take the floor. One last message that you want the readers or listeners or whatever it might be to get the most. What is the gift you want to give to the world as it relates to Lead Upwards?
Startup leadership is really hard to understand if you haven't done it. And unless you've been a startup leader, you don't really understand what the role entails. And a lot of people who are qualified to be startup leaders don't realize that they are potentially available to be in that seat. And I would say, if you are at all interested in leadership, you owe it to yourself to look into it, to consider it, and to get the resources that you deserve in order to be a better leader. And as I said earlier in the show, if you want to be in the startup world, you deserve to be here, and I'll be rooting for you.
Sarah Brown, thank you so much for coming on Thrive Loud. This has been awesome. Everybody check it out. Lead Upwards, how startup joiners can impact new ventures, build amazing careers, and inspire great teams. It's such a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
You got it. And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep moving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
Someone warming from below till the rain comes tumbling down.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Check us out on the web at thriveloud.com and follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook at Thrive Loud. And check us out on the Good Pods app at Thrive Loud, where you can follow, listen, and connect directly to Lou and all of the Thrive Loud episodes. Thanks for listening.